Hi everyone, I hope this video finds you well. I'm the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist and member of Black Space, Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation, and you can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for further information and updates. The ideas of Steve Biko and all the other ideas contained in the philosophy of Black consciousness have been valuable throughout my life, especially in understanding how we share an existential reality as Black people who are poor and marginalized. We have also seen how important and radical the same ideas can be, especially when applied in real-life situations. It is a historical fact that after the banning of the PAC and ANC, there was a political vacuum in the country, and all political activities were forced underground. It was during this period that the ideas of liberalism became more dominant, and the conversation becoming more about rights, equality, and citizenship, instead of the repossession of land, self-determination, and the sovereignty of African people. So the Black consciousness movement comes through in the late 1960s and brings the self-determination, repossession of land, sovereignty of African people back to national discourse. And we have also seen the effects of that in the 1970s and 1980s in anti-apartheid protests. The ideas of Steve Biko and the ideas of the Black consciousness movement in general are indeed timeless and cannot be contained within a specific historical period, because we have seen the impact they have had, especially after 1994, leading to the formations of Blackwash movement of Azania, September National Imbizo, Rhodes Must Fall, Fees Must Fall, Economic Freedom Fighters, Black First, Land First, Abahlali Basemjondolo, and others, reminding us that 1994 was merely a non-event of emancipation and did not alter the fundamental structure of South Africa, especially when we consider the real problem of settler colonialism, that settler colonial violence that underlies and that paved the way for the institution of apartheid. So it was more about the invasion of land, dispossession of land and resources, genocide, racial slavery, and those eventually leading to the formation of the institution of apartheid. And we have also seen how the same ideas of Steve Biko and the ideas of the Black consciousness movement have also been distorted, bastardized to suit certain narratives for selfish and narrow purposes. But here we still are, as political and spiritual descendants of Biko, still holding on to the same ideas, rereading Steve Biko in an attempt to derive a philosophy of praxis to change things around. Hi everyone, in case you're tuning in for the first time, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space, Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for further information and updates. Before I get into what this episode is about, if you are looking for recommendations, you can get yourself Steve Biko's book, the one that we are reading now, I Write What I Like, which is a collection of essays on the philosophy and movement of Black consciousness. You can also get yourself the book edited by Andile Mtama, Amanda Alexandra, and Nigel Gibson, the one that is showing on the screen right now with a red cover. At the same time, I actually recommend research papers more than books, because papers are easy to finish and you can read many of them if you want to understand the subject from different perspectives. So about this episode, this is episode number 2. The first episode was a general introduction. The episode that follows this one will be more of a biographical summary of Steve Biko's life, his intellectual formation and legacy. So the book that we are reading now, I Write What I Like, has about 18 chapters and a memoir. So I will keep on uploading the episodes as time goes. I appreciate your feedback. Take care. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well. In case you're tuning in for the first time, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space, Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for further information and updates. And just to respond to Andrew's comment, it is very beautiful that we're all gathered here. and I'm also looking forward to learning from you as we journey on together. The first 2 episodes were a general introduction and a note on method. Since you are reading I Write What I Like, a book having 18 chapters, I will upload a video for each chapter, sharing my perspective and understanding as well. In this episode, I will share a biographical summary of the life of Steve Biko, as well as his intellectual contributions and legacy. Steve Biko was born on the 18th of December 1946 in the Eastern Cape. He received primary and secondary education locally before proceeding to Lovedale College in Ellis and later Roman Catholic in Marion Hill, matriculating in 1965. Since I'm also a numerologist, based only on his date of birth, you can see someone who is socially active, articulate, and who has creative energy. We can see one person who believed in the greater good of humanity, someone very compassionate. In a general sense, we can also see a person whose life purpose was to learn from the changes and different life events. He was a student at the University of Natal, non-European section. He became a member of NUSAS, South African Student Union of South Africa, until 1968, when SASO, the South African Students Organization, was formed. He was elected first president and led the organization until he was succeeded by Bani Pityana. And those who know say Bani Pityana was actually the first person to say, "Black men, you're on your own," even when this is attributed to Biko. But those who know say it was actually Bani Pityana who said it first. Biko was married. He got married in 1970 to Mama Unsiki Biko. Mama Unsiki Biko was recently conferred an honorary doctorate by Rose University. The organization, SASO, was an integral part of the Black consciousness movement, since the organizing and the thinking were done there in the formative stages of the movement. The Black consciousness movement would later run a clinic, Zanempilo, as part of its Black community programs, would set up a trust fund, Zimel, and found an organization in schools, the South African Student Movement, whose leaders, Utsisi Mashinini, Khoso Siahlolo, and others, organized the Soweto Uprising in 1976. Later, after serious consideration and need to involve more Black people in the struggle against Apartheid, they founded BPC, the Black People's Convention, which was also the first anti-Apartheid political organization to have a Black woman as president, Mme Winnie Khware. Before his death on the 12th of September 1977, he was detained on the 18th of August of the same year under Section 6 of the Terrorism Act and taken to Port Elizabeth, Gqeberha. But to read more on the life of Biko, you can check out the South African History Online, the book that I spoke about earlier, Biko Lives, edited by Angela Mutama, and there's also another book by Xolela Manu. Yes, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well. I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. As we are currently reading the book I Write What I Like, a collection of essays on the philosophy and movement of Black consciousness. In this episode, we are looking into one of the chapters on SASO, the South African Students Organization. The chapter bears the title SASO, Its Role, Its Significance, and Its Future. In the early 1960s, non-white students founded organizations such as the African Students Association, African Students Union of South Africa, and the Progressive National Students Union, but all could not stand the test of time, and NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students, was dominant even on Black campuses, with a strong hold in white universities like Rose University, Wits UCT, and the University of Natal. It was only towards the end of the 1960s that the UCM, the University Christian Movement, was founded and gave Black students a greater chance of coming together. The South African Students Organization, SASO, was formed in 1968 and inaugurated in 1969, where Steve Biko was elected as its first president. The following is a presidential address to the first national formation of SASO, the first formation school of SASO, held at the University of Natal in December 1969. Steve Biko highlights how the formation of SASO was met with mixed reactions from the student population at large. On the one hand, there were militant students who maintained that the organization was far from being the answer that the Africans needed. On the other side, there were white students who feared that the organization was making non-white students more militant. Steve Biko noted all of this with surprise, mentioning that it seems sometimes that it is a crime for the non-white students to think for themselves. The idea of everything being done for the blacks is an old one, and all liberals take pride in it. But once the black students want to do things for themselves, suddenly they are regarded as becoming militant. Biko also went on to make it clear that they are not necessarily seeking to unseat NUSAS as a national student union, but were more concerned with the issues that non-white students faced, making their grievances heard, since NUSAS was largely concerned with the issues that faced white students and their community at large. Steve Biko and his comrades did not only want black visibility, but black participation as well. It is also interesting to note that one of the aims of SASO was to establish a common identity for all non-white students. We can already see the seeds that later inspired the definition of black as a political identity, because it is widely known that Steve Biko, in the later essays, he did write about this definition of black, saying that being black is not a matter of pigmentation, but a reflection of a mental attitude. Thank you. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well. In case you're tuning in for the first time, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for further information and updates. Before we proceed, let me echo Adele's sentiments about the relevance of the ideas of Steve Biko. Even after 30 years, the country had its first democratic elections. In the first episode, we spoke about how that 1994 political movement did not eradicate the settler colonial structure of dispossession and conquest that gave power and maintained the institution of apartheid for so many years. In one of the later essays, Biko writes about how so many organizations and leaders were dancing around a problem, making it about policy or the application of law, rather than settler colonialism, the disposition of land and resources. He wrote about how the oversimplification of the problem would cause a misdiagnosis that will result into grave consequences for succeeding generations. And here we are today because Biko was correct. In this episode, we are looking into the letter that Steve Biko sent to the SRC Presidents and other student leaders, clarifying the position of SASO, the South African Students' Organization. As mentioned in the previous episode, the formation of SASO was received with mixed reactions, some saying that the organization was far from being the answer, while others, particularly white liberals, saying it was encouraging militancy. This is a letter addressed to SRC presidents and student leaders of different organizations at both English and Afrikaans medium universities. In a general sense, Biko gives a historical account about the formation of SASO. He takes it back to the University of Fort Hare, which was virtually known to be a black university, and how because of a series of anti-apartheid demonstrations at the university, the SLC was eventually dissolved and the university placed under the administration of the regime. He also mentions how there was then an establishment of other segregated universities for colors, for Indians, for Zulus, for Sothos. In the letter, making it clear that they do not have ambitions of unseating NUSAS as a national student union. He commends the UCM for its radical black theological politics and distances SASO from any association with the Afrikaanse student bond. In the book, I write what I like. This chapter comes after the presidential address to the first National Formation School of SASO held at the University of Natal in December 1969. And it comes just before the chapter on the political atmosphere on black campuses since the formation and inaugural conference of SASO at the University of the North in July 1969. Take care. Hi everyone, I'm the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for further information and updates. In this episode, we are looking into Steve Biko's reflection on his presidential tour to Black campuses. In the book, I Write What I Like, the one that we're currently reading, the chapter has the title, Black Campuses and Current Feelings. It comes after his presidential address to the First National Formation School of SASO in 1969, and comes just immediately after his letter to the SRC Presidents and student leaders. It is 2 pages and probably the shortest chapter in the book. In the previous chapters, we saw how there were mixed reactions to the formation of SASO. While the militants predicted that the organization was far from being the answer that the Africans needed, the liberals, on the other hand, feared that the organization was encouraging militancy. Biko puts emphasis on what he calls the old approach of bilateral relations between white and black students, saying that while the relationship was purported to be about finding the solution to the problem of apartheid, the white leaders that the black students depended on were rather more concerned with sense of morality and liberal ideas that were oblivious to the white racism that the black students and the black community in general faced. This is how Biko puts it in his own words. One found wherever he went the question, where do we go from here? This again is a tragic result of the old approach, where the blacks were made to fit into a pattern, largely and wholly determined by the white students. Hence, our originality and imagination have been dulled to the point where it takes a supreme effort to act logically, even in order to follow one's beliefs and convictions. Biko realized that as non-white students focused more on the issues they were faced with, there was then a greater chance for group awareness and pride towards a collective identity of the oppressed and subjugated majority. It was, as it was held also in recent times, during the Fees Must Fall and Rose Must Fall student protest, that the experiences of exclusion that the black students faced at the university were merely a microcosm of the structural and socio-economic problems that the rest of the black community was struggling with in the belly of settler colonial apartheid. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In 1970, Steve Biko was succeeded by Bani Pityana as president of SASO and elected as chairperson of SASO Publications. Later on in the same year, he got married to Umama Onontsikelelo Biko, who was recently awarded an honorary doctorate by Rose University. In this episode, we are looking into the first of the articles Biko wrote as part of the series I Write What I Like, all of which he signed off with the pseudonym Frank Talk. In the book I Write What I Like, the one we are currently reading, the name of the chapter is Black Souls in White Skins. On the surface, we can already see Frantz Fanon's influence on Biko's thinking, with Biko playing around with the title of Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Mask, a book on the psychological and political analysis of the oppression of black people. Biko opens the article by highlighting how homogeneous the white community is, as the whole community constitutes the oppressor camp. For the purpose of the article, he says he's not so concerned with the conservatives, those who see the privileges of the apartheid system as their birthright. No, he says he's more concerned with those whites who do not want to be seen as people who are at a privileged position, those whites who call themselves non-conformists, liberals, or leftists. Here is Biko in his own words. These are the people who claim that they too feel the oppression just as acutely as the blacks, and should therefore be jointly involved in the black man's struggle for a place under the sun. In short, these are the people who say they have black souls wrapped up in white skins. In the previous episodes, we saw how the formation of SASO was met with mixed reactions, including the white liberals accusing Biko and his comrades of becoming militant. In episode 6 particularly, we have gone through Steve Biko's response to those accusations, saying that the liberals were only bothered that they were now starting to lose their grip on black students. Black students were tired of depending on the white student leaders for answers concerning the affairs of black students and the affairs of the black community in general. Most of the emphasis in this article is on the idea of integration, where Biko believes that, given the conditions of apartheid, it is therefore impossible for the blacks and the whites to integrate and build a prosperous society together without having first dealt with the complexes of superiority and inferiority. These complexes are important for us to then understand, ultimately, racism as the power to oppress or subjugate. The same power to oppress that the black people did not have due to their subsumption to the structural and socio-economic violence of the settler colonial system of apartheid. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In this episode, we are looking into the second article in the I Write What I Like series. This is an important essay because it was the first way Biko mentioned black consciousness as a philosophy, even when he was using it more as a theoretical lens. In the previous episode, Biko looked at the white community, saying that even when there might have been differences in political opinion, all white people, conservative or liberal, constituted the oppressor camp. In this present article, Biko shifts the focus to the black community, the oppressed camp, in an attempt to assess the impact settler colonialism and apartheid may have had on them as a collective. In one of the later essays, Biko writes about how the mind of the oppressed is the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor. In his investigation, Biko realized how the arrest of political leaders and the banning of political organizations such as the ANC and the PEC forced a lot of political activities underground, leaving a vacuum in the country. Towards the end of the 1960s into the 1970s, liberalism was the dominant ideology. It was never about the repossession of land and resources or the self-determination of Africans, but apartheid being seen as an issue of policy and that of the application of law. Biko accused all those who held that view as working on an oversimplified premise, an oversimplification that is going to have grave consequences for future generations. Biko goes on to describe the black people of the time as a defeated people, saying, I quote, "To a large extent, the evildoers have succeeded to produce at the output end of their machine the kind of black man that is only man in form." Close quote. Most of the people who read and write about Biko have always had an optimistic way of reading him, shoving away any passages that do not seem to conjure with their views and agendas. But we are called upon to correct this, reading and presenting his ideas in the best way possible, that it defends his political and intellectual legacy. Thank you. Hi everyone, in case you're tuning in for the first time, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In the previous episode, we saw how Biko introduced the philosophy of black consciousness as a lens through which we could assess and analyze the disposition of African people. In this episode, we dive deeper into Steve Biko's application of black consciousness in the political events of the time within what he calls institutionalized separate development. Naturally, black consciousness as an anti-apartheid decolonial philosophy should have something to say about segregation and more generally about the existence of Bantustans or the homelands. That is, ultimately, what is the benefit of separate development on stolen land? This is something that many of the contemporaries of Biko did not understand, especially those who were leading these Bantustans, content in winning the favor of the regime, running the homelands, that they inevitably became instrumental in maintaining the institution of apartheid. The black consciousness and the PAC were vehemently opposed to that, so much that In 1978, Mangosuthu Buthelezi was chased away from Robert Sobuku's funeral as someone who was seen to be working with the regime. Before I conclude this, let me also mention that Steve Biko saw the Colored Labour Party as a very progressive party in its opposition to apartheid, juxtaposing it with the Federal Party. Usually when people talk about the anti-apartheid movement, less is said about the role of the colors, the colored leaders, and the colored movements that were involved in the struggle. So this is homework. Please, during your free time, please read up on the Colored Labour Party, how it started, and all the activities it was engaged in. Thank you. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well. I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. Since episode 8, we have seen how Steve Biko has been assessing and analyzing political activities and events using Black consciousness as a theoretical lens. In this episode, we look into Biko's perspective on culture. He starts off by accusing white liberals of having made themselves authorities as far as African culture is concerned, citing a study by the Institute for Race Relations on feeding habits of Black people. Biko does mention that even when the 1652 arrival of settlers in South Africa may have led to an assimilation into European culture by persuasion or force, there are those countless cultural practices amongst the Africans that still carry the DNA of the old. Biko extends this to other oppressed groups as well, the colors and the Indians. A large part of the article discusses African culture with respect to the conception of God or a higher power. Here is Biko in his own words. All people are agreed that Africans are a deeply religious race, in various forms of worship that one found throughout the southern part of our continent. There was at least a common basis. We accepted without any doubt the existence of a God. We had our own community of saints. We believed, and this was consistent with our views of life, that all people who died had a special place next to God. We felt that communication with God could only be through these people. We never knew anything about hell. We do not believe that God could create a people only to punish them eternally after a short period on earth. And elsewhere in the same article, here is Biko again. In rejecting Western values, therefore, we are rejecting those things that are not only foreign to us, but that seek to destroy the most cherished of our beliefs. In this article, we can see Biko consistently proving to us that Black consciousness as a theoretical framework and philosophy can be used to think about almost every aspect of our society. Hi everyone, in case you're tuning in for the first time, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In this episode, we are looking into the paper that Steve Biko produced for the SASO Leadership Training course in 1971. The paper defines not only what Black consciousness is as a philosophy and movement, but also makes provisions on who should be considered Black. Here is Biko in the first paragraph of the paper. We have in our policy manifesto defined Blacks as those who are by law or tradition, politically, economically, and socially discriminated against as a group in South African society, and identifying themselves as a unit in the struggle towards the realization of their aspirations. Biko goes on to say that being Black is more of a mental attitude than a matter of pigmentation, and that anyone who is prepared to fight against all systems of oppression that make them a non-human, an object of racial violence, then that person should be considered Black. The distinction is also made by Malcolm X when he distinguishes between the Black Revolution and the Negro Revolution, describing the Negro Revolution as a turn the other cheek revolution. So, in this context, then the Negro is what the Black consciousness movement referred to as the non-white or the non-European, a classification seen as an extension of whiteness, a people defined by what they lack or what they are not. It is therefore these same non-whites and non-Europeans who are politically seen as people who yearn for whiteness, despite the color of their skins making it impossible. Biko believes that no one can be conscious and still willingly surrender their power to the enemy, seeking reform instead of overturning the structures and the systems of oppression altogether. In the previous episodes, we did discuss the Black consciousness movement's idea of integration, saying there could never be integration having not first dealt with the complexes of superiority and inferiority, because these also manifest themselves in how white people want to be on either side of oppression as the cause, and as the liberals who want to tell black people how to respond to their oppression. In this paper, ultimately, Biko writes about how white racism should be countered with solidarity amongst the oppressed, because fragmentation prolongs and deepens their oppression. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In this episode, we look into the paper Steve Biko gave at the Conference of Black Ministers of Religion, organized by the Black Community Programs, BCP, in 1972. And during this time, Ben Khwapa was the executive director of the BCP. In episode 8, after Biko shifted his focus from the white community to the black community, he introduced Black consciousness as a theoretical lens or framework through which he could assess and analyze the impact settler colonial violence has had on the collective psyche of black people. Since that episode, we saw how Biko used Black consciousness to speak or answer to different political, economic, and cultural questions concerning the affairs of black people. In this episode, Biko gives us a history on how adaptable the religion of Christianity has been in other parts of the world, where it was seen to take the form of the culture of the people it was introduced to. But he says that was not the case when it was introduced to the Africans of the southern tip of Africa, where people were forced to leave behind their customs and cultural practices in order to become Christ-like, consequently causing the divide between Amakawa and Amakoboka. Notwithstanding, since the people of the time were deeply religious, Biko believed that religion should be seen to have something to say about the oppression of black people. Religion as a social institution should be seen to have a social function, condemning racial oppression and promoting true integration. And he calls this Black theology. Here is Biko in his own words. Black theology is a situational interpretation of Christianity. It seeks to relate the present-day black man to God within the context of the black man's suffering and his attempts to get out of it. It shifts the emphasis from the petty sins to major sins in society, thereby ceasing to teach the people to suffer peacefully. And lastly, let me conclude with another quote from Biko. I would like to remind the black ministry and all the black people that God is not in the habit of coming down from heaven to solve people's problems on earth. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In the previous episodes, we saw how Steve Biko regards white racism as the fundamental contradiction in the country, a thesis whose antithesis needs to be developed towards an interplay of forces into an egalitarian society, resulting from a true integration. In this episode, we look into the paper Biko gave at a conference in 1971 in Cape Town, sponsored by the A. Bailey Institute for Interracial Studies, All other student organizations were also present, including NUSAS and the Afrikaanse Studentenbond. As the heading of the presentation suggests, Biko spoke on the philosophy of black consciousness and the totality of white racism. It is for this reason that in episode 7, when Biko made an analysis of the white community, concluded that the whole community constituted the oppressor camp. Whether one was a conservative, liberal, or leftist, that did not make much of a difference. In our times, the Democratic Alliance is one of the examples. Even when the organization has always strived to be seen as more liberal or more democratic, allowing black and colored leaders up its ranks and penetrating the townships and small towns, ultimately, its commitment to the material interests of the white bourgeois classes has never changed. In episode 9, we spoke about the fragmentation of black resistance and saw how the Black Consciousness Movement and the PAC were vehemently opposed to the existence of the Bantustan homelands, especially within the context of separate development resulting from the dispossession of land and resources of the African people. Besides the white liberals interfering in black affairs, those black leaders who worked within the system of apartheid, happy to be presiding over homelands, were also an obstacle, especially in how they ended up being effective as instruments maintaining the settler colonial system of apartheid. In this presentation, ultimately, we can see once more Frantz Fanon's influence on Biko, with Biko juxtaposing nationalism with national consciousness towards an understanding of how the totality of white racism in South Africa and the settler colonial system of apartheid are but a microcosm of the global system of anti-black imperialism. Hi everyone, in case you're tuning in for the first time, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In the previous episodes, we mentioned how there was a political vacuum in the country and how this was largely because of the banning of political organizations like the ANC and the PAC, and this followed by what were known as the Biko raids in 1963. In this episode, we look into the essay Fear, an Important Determinant in South African Politics. This essay is chapter 12 in the book we are currently reading, I Write What I Like, a collection of essays on the philosophy and movement of black consciousness in the belly of apartheid South Africa. Steve Biko writes this essay in 1971, observing how dejected and demoralized the masses of black people were. While this was largely due to state violence and intimidation, the banning orders, house arrests, the raids and detentions, Biko recognizes that all these were intended to create fear amongst the oppressed community of black people. Biko therefore does not understand why time is wasted trying to understand the logic in state violence and intimidation, especially when all of these are a means to reinforce the original cruelty of invasion and the dispossession of land and resources of the African people. Here is Biko in his own words. My premise has always been that black people should not, at any one stage, be surprised at some of the atrocities committed by the white government. This to me follows logically after their initial assumption that they, being a settler minority, can have the right to be supreme masters. If they could be cruel enough to cow the natives down with brutal force and install themselves as perpetual rulers in a foreign land, then anything else they do to the same black people becomes logical in terms of their initial cruelty. To expect justice from them at any stage is to be naive. Biko goes on to also highlight how violent the townships in South Africa are and how they are the complete opposites of the suburbs and all other white residential areas. This is because the townships have deliberately been created to become what Frantz Fanon calls the zones of non-being. In recent times, for example, Blackwash movement of Azania did important work around the politics that engender the geo-socio-economic differences between Sandton and the township of Alexandra. a visual representation of how divided South Africa is. So, in 1971, at the height of state violence, this is the context within which Biko writes his essay, observing how all the atrocities create fear in order for the oppressed masses of black people to willingly surrender their lives and power to the regime, accepting the might of the settler colonial system of apartheid. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. It was after the Nationalist Party assumed power that the idea of the Bantustans homelands was finally implemented, where different ethnic groups were accorded their own lands to run their affairs independently. As discussed in the previous episodes, the Black Consciousness Movement and the PEC were opposed to the idea and the existence of the Bantustan homelands. And here is Steve Biko explaining why. In a land rightfully ours, we find settlers coming to tell us where to stay and what powers we shall have, even without consulting us. The whole idea is made to appear as if for us, while working against our very existence. Biko makes us realize that this is not merely about the principle of divide and conquer, but about the power to assume such a role in the first place. In episode 11, we went through Biko's expansion of SASO's definition of black. In the SASO Policy Manifesto, the political identity black describes those who stood in contradistinction to the systems of settler colonial oppression, a system that created out of the oppressed black people a people who were no people, non-beings or non-humans. So anyone who was working within that system or seemed to be working within the system was not regarded black, but more of an instrument of the system, an extension of whiteness or European culture and domination. It is therefore for this reason that the leaders of the Bantustan homelands were not trusted but seen as sellouts. So let me conclude this episode with another quote from Steve Biko. Black people must learn to refuse to be pawns in the white man's game. This type of politics calls upon us to provide our own initiative and act at our own pace, and not that created for us by the system. No Bantustan leader can tell us that he is acting at his own initiative when he enters the realms of Bantustan politics. At this stage of our history, we cannot have our struggle being tribalized through the creation of Zulu, Xhosa, and Tswana politicians by the system. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well. I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. It has been over a week reading the book I Write What I Like, a collection of Steve Biko's writings on the philosophy and movement of black consciousness in apartheid South Africa. That means we have already done the 15 episodes. If you find this content informative and would like for us to do something like this even in the future, please like and repost our videos. In this episode, we look into the essay, Black Consciousness and the Quest for a True Humanity. Before the essay was republished as a chapter in this book, it was first published as a book chapter in Black Theology, a South African Voice, edited by Basil Moore in 1973. In episode 8, we saw how Biko introduced the philosophy of black consciousness, using it as a theoretical framework to analyze and understand the oppression of black people from different perspectives. In episode 12, we saw how Biko used the philosophy of black consciousness to make us understand how instrumental the religion of Christianity was in the colonization of Africans by Europeans. During Biko's time, black people were deeply religious. It was for this reason that he and his comrades, in their critique of Christianity, formulated a black consciousness interpretation of Christianity, conceptualized as black theology. In the present episode, Biko advances his critique of Christianity. He says, Christianity has always been an adaptable religion, assimilating into the cultures of the people it was introduced to in different parts of the world. But on the contrary, None of that happened in the case of the Africans, where it was imposed, leading to the Africans leaving behind their customs and cultural practices. Here is Biko in his own words. Black theology describes God as a fighting God, not a passive God who allows a lie to rest unchallenged. It grapples with existential problems and does not claim to be a theology of absolutes. It seeks to bring back God to the black man and to the truth and reality of his situation. This is an important aspect of black consciousness, for quite a large proportion of black people in South Africa are Christians, still swimming in the mire of confusion, the aftermath of the missionary approach. Biko says there should be a theology that acknowledges the history of war and dispossession in South Africa, a theology that acknowledges the roles figures like Shaka, Mushweshwe, and Yinza played in the anti-colonial wars in South Africa. Moreover, in the essay, he also mentions that there is a problem of white people who want to be on either side of the anti-apartheid fight, as the cause of white racism and as the liberals who want to tell black people how to respond to the violence of the settler colonial system of apartheid. For further reading, you can check out a chapter by Tiniko Sam Maluleke called May the Black God Stand Please, Biko's Challenge to Religion, a chapter in the book edited by Andile Mutama, Amanda Alexandra, and Jill Gibson, the one on the screen with the red cover. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. Before we get into the present episode, let me echo Pastor's sentiments about the current state of black people in the country. You would remember that in the previous episodes, especially in episode 1, we spoke about how that 1994 political moment did not alter the fundamental structure of settler colonialism in the country and the racial slavery that underlies it. There was no repossession of land and resources, and nothing about the self-determination of Africans. In this episode, we look into the testimony Steve Biko gave at the BPC-SASO Trial in 1974. The extracts are chapters 15 and 16 in the book we are currently reading, I Write What I Like. You would remember that SASO is the South African Students' Organization, which was founded after the black students broke away from NUSAS. The BPC is the Black People's Convention, founded later to be an umbrella organization for all black consciousness organizations, formations, and programs. The president of the BPC at the time was Mme Winnie Khware, who was the first black woman to be a president of an anti-apartheid political organization. So this trial was after the members of the Black Consciousness Movement were arrested after the Viva Frelimo rallies in the country. After Frelimo's victory in Mozambique, Samora Machel becoming the first president of independent Mozambique. The rallies were seen as illegal, leading to the members of the Black Consciousness Movement to be charged under the Terrorism Act and sentenced to imprisonment on Robben Island. One of the highlights was when Biko was asked to read the first paragraph of the resolutions of the GSC, the General Students' Council. Quote, SASO is a black student organization working for the liberation of the black man, first from the psychological oppression by themselves through inferiority complex, and second from the physical one, accruing from living in a white racist society. Close quote. Most of the evidence that Biko gave was centered on the politics of SASO, BPC, and the Black Consciousness Movement in general. Most of it was based on the cultural and political use of blackness. But for more information, check out a book edited by Millard Arnold named after Biko, with a focus on his public statements and testaments, the one on the screen. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I'm an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In this episode, we look into the memorandum that Steve Biko prepared for the US Senator Dick Clark, chairperson of the Senate Subcommittee for Africa. This was when he was in Lesotho for a conference at the African American Institute. In this memorandum, Steve Biko describes the political climate in the country, describing how repressive the apartheid regime has been towards opposition and liberatory efforts through house arrests, kidnappings, detentions, and imprisonment on Robben Island. And Biko calls on America to intervene in a progressive way that would benefit the majority of Black people. Here is Biko in his own words. All this underlines the importance of the role America can play in shaping the future of the things to come. Because of its bad record, America is a poor second to Russia when it comes to choice of an ally, in spite of Black opposition to any form of domination by a foreign power. Heavy investments in the South African economy, bilateral trade with South Africa, cultural exchanges in the fields of sports, music, and of late political ventures are all the sins with which America is accused. This is Biko speaking on behalf of the Black Consciousness Movement, urging America to be on the right side of history and give political support to Black people. And one of the demands here is the release of banned and imprisoned figures like Nelson Mandela, Robert Sobukwe, Gavin Mbeki, Walter Sisulu, Bani Pitjana, Jerry Mudisana, Aubrey Mokwape, and Strini Modley. Thanks for the support. Take care. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In this episode, we look into one of the interviews Steve Biko did before his final detention and murder in police custody. The interview is chapter 18 in the book we're currently reading, I Write What I Like. While there is no mention of the actual date of the interview and the name of the interviewer, upon research I found that the interview took place in July 1977, just before Biko's final detention in August 1977 and his death in September 1977. The name of the interviewer is Bennett Zylstra, and the interview was done for the Reformed Journal. Biko starts off by describing the political climate of the time, how the banning of the PAC and the ANC and the arrest of their leaders between 1963 and 1964 resulted into a political vacuum in the country. As a result, the only audible political voice in the country was that of the white liberals in organizations such as NUSAS, the Liberal Party, and the Progressive Party. This also led to Black people, especially Black students, to join these organizations so that their oppositional views can also be heard. But this soon resulted into the whitening of the anti-apartheid struggle, with whites being on the offensive and white liberals dictating how Blacks should respond to the settler colonial violence of the system of apartheid. That is what then led to the formation of SASO, the South African Students' Organization, towards the end of the 1960s in 1968. Here is Biko in his own words.
Changes which are to come can only come as a result of a program worked out by Black people. And for Black people to be able to work out a program, they need to defeat the one main element in politics which was working against them, and this was the psychological feeling of inferiority.
As mentioned in the previous episodes, the Black Consciousness Movement aimed to bring back to national discourse the self-determination of Africans. in a climate dominated by political opinions about rights and citizenship, reducing the settler colonial system of apartheid to an issue of policy. One of the most influential members of SASO was Onkgopozi Abraham Tiro, the one on the screen, whose graduation speech in 1973 at the University of the North, now called University of Limpopo, criticized the education system of Bantu education, the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, and the anti-blackness that underlied that settler colonial system of apartheid. One of the highlights was when he said, quote, "We as the black graduates, by virtue of our age and academic standing, are being called upon to bear greater responsibilities. Our so-called leaders have become the bolts of the same machine which is crushing us as a nation. We have to go back. Times are changing and we should change with them." The members of the Black Consciousness Movement who went back to their communities helped in the formation of, for example, SASM, the South African Student Movement. Amongst the members of SASM were Khoso Siahlolo Tsitsi Mashinini, Sibongile Makabela, Dikeledi Motswene, Priscilla Msisinyane, Naledi Kidi Mutswa, and others. And all of these were amongst the students who were directly involved in the June 16 uprisings of 1976. For more information on the young girls and the members of the Black Consciousness Movement who were directly involved in the uprisings, please look for the article on the screen written by Thando Sipuye in 2017. Let me end this episode once again with the words of Steve Biko.
Society. First of all, we said as black students, we could not participate in multiracial organizations, which were by far white organizations, because in this country there is an overwhelming number of white students at university. And secondly, these organizations were concentrating mainly on problems which were affecting the white student community, which meant that NUSAS as an organization gave political opinions which were largely affected by the whiteness of that particular organization.
Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. Before we get into this episode, let me give thanks to Lesego for the encouraging words. And even after the last episode, I will still be here for questions and book recommendations. In the previous episode, we looked into one of the interviews that Steve Biko did before his final detention in August 1977. In this episode, we look into another interview that Biko did. The extract is chapter 19 and the final chapter in the book we are currently reading, I Write What I Like, a collection of writings on the philosophy and movement of the consciousness in the belly of apartheid South Africa. All that is publicly known about this interview is that it was conducted in 1977 by an American businessman before Steve Biko's final detention and was published the following year in 1978 in the New Republic. What is most striking about this text is Biko's fearlessness. You would remember that in episode 14, we discussed Biko's analysis on how fear is used as a political weapon by the apartheid regime to suppress liberatory efforts. Notwithstanding, Biko's question was, if the settlers had already the power to dispossess and colonize millions of Africans, why should anything they do now scare us, especially when all that is done is but a means to reinforce the original crime of invasion, dispossession of land and resources. In this present text, Biko tells the interviewer about the need to first overcome the irrational fear of death, saying, "You are either alive and proud or you are dead, and when you are dead, you can't care anymore, and your method of death can itself be a politicizing thing." Throughout the text, Biko shares with the interviewer and with us, the readers, how uncollaborative he was with the police officers, especially when they thought using excessive violence was going to scare him into talking. Their violence is what made him even more uncollaborative and standing up for himself in self-defense to collapse interrogations. I think all the other information about his transfer from where he was detained to Pretoria, undressed, and his eventual death in Pretoria, I think that information is widely known. So let me leave you with another quote from Biko himself. "It is better to die for an idea that will live than to live for an idea that will die." Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. In the previous episodes, we looked into the interviews, essays, and speeches that Steve Biko gave on the formation of SASO and the philosophy and movement of Black consciousness in Apartheid South Africa, describing Apartheid as a settler colonial system preceded by racial slavery and the dispossession of land and resources of the African people. In this episode, we look into the last text in the book, a memoir by Father Aelred Stubbs. Father Stubbs was an Anglican monk and spiritual mentor. He met with Biko in the late 1960s at the Federal Theological Seminary. The memoir is about 80 pages and tells a story about how he met Biko and how their relationship as comrades grew from then. When Biko was banned with no newspaper, radio station allowed to use his voice and quote his writings, Father Stubbs was the one who smuggled Biko's writings out of the country, compiled and edited them into a book. Even after the mass arrests, Biko's death, and the uprisings in the country, Father Stubbs continued to show support to the members of the Black consciousness movement. In the text, he does mention that he met Biko through his brother, Kaya Biko, who was a member of the PAC, and that is how he also got involved in some of the activities of the PAC. In the next episode, we are going to do a reflective summary of all the readings we did in the previous episodes. Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. Over the past 2 weeks, we discussed and unpacked the ideas found in the book I Write What I Like, a collection of writings on the philosophy and movement of Black consciousness in the belly of Apartheid South Africa. In episodes 1, 2, and 3, having opened the video series, I gave a brief history of the Black consciousness movement and the relevance of the movement's ideas in post-94 South Africa, saying that 1994 political moment in the country should be read as a non-event of emancipation, as the settler colonial structure that preceded the institution of apartheid remains intact even to the present day. In episodes 4, 5, and 6, we looked into the address Biko gave to the first formation school of SASO in 1969 as president of SASO, and the letter he sent to SRC Presidents and other student leaders introducing SASO and the ideas it represented. And we finally went through the report on the political climate of most Black campuses at the time. In episode 11, we looked at Biko's address to the SASO leadership, where he also expanded on the definition of Black consciousness. In episodes 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, and 15, after we saw Biko introducing the Black consciousness philosophy as a theoretical framework, we saw him using it as a lens to understand the white community as a whole, saying that as a community, the white community constituted the oppressor camp. It did not matter if one was a conservative, a liberal, or a leftist. We also saw Biko using Black consciousness to make us understand state violence, fear, religion, and the Bantustans homelands how all of these are used to suppress liberatory efforts against the settler colonial system of apartheid. In episode 17, we discussed the testimony Biko gave at the BPC-SASO trial, where the judge ended up finding the members of Black Consciousness Movement guilty and sent them to serve their sentences on Robben Island. In episodes 19 and 20, we discussed the interviews Biko did before his final detention, one with Bernard Zylstra for the Reformed Journal, and the other with an American businessman published the following year in 1978 in the New Republic. In the last episode, episode 21, we looked into Father Stubbs' memoir, how he met Biko through his elder brother Kaya and continued to work alongside Biko as comrades. Let me end off this with a quote from Biko. "It is better to die for an idea that will live than to live for an idea that will die." Hi everyone, I am the Spiritual Seeker. I am an independent researcher, numerologist, and member of Black Space Azania. Black Space is a Black consciousness formation. You can follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page for more information and updates. As mentioned before, the ideas of Steve Biko and all the other ideas contained in the philosophy of Black consciousness have been valuable in my life, especially in understanding how we share an existential reality as Black people who are poor and marginalized. In recent history, we have also seen how timeless the ideas of Steve Biko and the ideas of the Black consciousness movement in general are, and cannot be contained within a specific historical period, especially in the formation of movements like Blackwash, September National Imbizo, Rhodes Must Fall, Fees Must Fall, Economic Freedom Fighters, Blackfest, Landfest, Abahlali Basemjondolo, and others, reminding us that 1994 political moment in South Africa was merely a non-event of emancipation and did not alter the fundamental structure of settler colonialism in the country. That invasion, dispossession of land and resources, genocide, racial slavery, eventually leading to the formation of the institution and system of apartheid. As also mentioned before, we have also seen how the ideas of Steve Biko and the ideas of the Black consciousness movement in general have been distorted and bastardized to suit certain narratives for selfish and narrow purposes. And as political and spiritual descendants of Biko, it is up to us, to defend the ideas, defend those revolutionary ideas of Steve Biko, working towards a philosophy of praxis, towards the end of the world as we know it. And thanks to everyone who's been kind and supportive. I really appreciate you. And there were moments where I felt like giving it up and focus my attention on other things. But the revolutionary spirit of Biko and all other Black consciousness stalwarts inspired me to continue. I've also added pictures of some of my comrades. Those are my comrades in Black Space, Azania. And I've also added a picture of a pen that I was using throughout the series. And as you can see, it has run out. It has run out of ink. Hopefully, I will replace it very soon. With the help of a cash send, probably. Thank you.